I had a dream last night. I am female. I am a woman. I am standing in a huge, wide open space. Grassy. A savanna. A huge park. So much space. So much blue sky. With beautiful trees. Flowers everywhere. The sound of birds. Butterflies. There are animals everywhere. But they are just roaming about. Friendly. Odd. Everything is nice, but I am a bit uncomfortable. It is almost too nice. Or more. I wonder what else is out there. There's a huge tree in the center of the garden. I go up to the tree. There's beautiful fruit. Gorgeous, shining like a ruby. I look closely at the fruit, and then I pick it. It just seems like the fruit is right, and it is the right thing to do. It is almost like the fruit is saying, it is okay. You are okay. I am here for you. I take the fruit, and I put it in my mouth, and I close my eyes, and I take a huge, big bite. It is amazing, the best fruit ever. I open my eyes, and the entire park has shifted. It is still gorgeous and huge, but I can see an edge. Something around it. It has a different kind of light, more vivid. More colors. I am excited. I walk towards the edge. There are different sounds and noises, and the energy is different. It's a different time. Time, which I did not know a minute before it started. Different. It is faster, and is just different. I'm not sure. I am trepidatious. There is an edge that I can feel, and there are some differences between the park and the other place. The thing I am calling outside. I stand there on the edge of the two worlds. I wonder if there are more, or I've never wondered that before. I wonder what will happen, what I should do, where I should go. I look for a long time at the park. It is nice and so beautiful, but it also confining and claustrophobic. I did not know that yesterday. I did not know yesterday, today, and tomorrow before now, this moment, this present. I take a strong bite of the red fruit. It comforts me and gives me strength. I turn away from the park and walk towards the border of the other place. I am strident and confident and so scared. I have another new feeling, alone. But solid. I see the man out of the corner of my eye. I know him. He's familiar. He is watching me. He has some sort of soft look in his eye, like he is holding me with his eyes, with his stare. Later, I will call it concern. Maybe love. Maybe possession. Maybe force. He yells something. Later, I will say it was my name. He runs up to me. He says, I want. He had never, or we had never expressed desire before. I mean, any kind. We did not know it. It felt good. It felt sweet, flowing, fluid, like our bodies, which had felt so constrained. We felt all these things at the same time. Love, hate, fear, calm, joy, devastation, joined, separated. No, those are not emotions. We learned the difference between emotions and thinking. We learned reason. I looked at the man, and he was holding a red fruit too. I saw it and looked at him direct in the eyes, and he smiled. I smiled back right into his eyes. We were filled with glee. Much later, walking in the other place and thinking about the park, we would call it vulnerable. We would call it strong. We would call it human.
Coming and joining us here for this panel. My name is Mindi Yeger, and I am a Footsteps member and a member of the Member Advisory Council. I joined Footstep in 2014 because I heard about the mentorship program. And having done a lot of the coming out of that community on my own with my children, I felt it was time for me to give back. And I really never looked back because this organization and this community has really supported me in ways I didn't even know that I needed. I wanted to just give you some context for how the panel's going to go. We're going to have about 35 minutes or 40 minutes of conversation. And then if you have any questions, you were all handed an index card. So any questions, write the question down. And at some point, I'm going to ask you all to raise your hand, and Julie is going to come and collect your questions from you. And then we'll have the Q&A after that. It's my honor to be a part of this panel and to introduce to you our three members. Okay, we're going to start with Michael P. Jenkins, who just gave us that beautiful parable. And I'm going to read directly from the bio that he submitted, so I can't get in trouble. Michael P. Jenkins is an eclectically trained psychoanalyst and clinical social worker practicing in New York City. He's a teacher, supervisor, and training analyst. He holds a certificate in psychoanalysis from Psychoanalysis Psychotherapy Study Center and received his master's in social work from NYU. He was director of programs at Footsteps during its formative years and worked in a community health clinic in New York City during his early social work years. A major area of focus is how issues of transition between cultures and religions impact individual identity. He is trained in both contemporary Freudian and Jungian approaches to dreams and creativity. He specializes in the use of images, dreams, and imagination as a way of fostering individual and societal transformation. Michael is on faculty at PPSC and teaches at New York Counseling and Guidance Services. Michael is also an exhibiting visual artist with a studio in Tribeca, New York City. Everybody welcome Michael. Okay, next up we have the Jesse Pietroniro. Jesse is interested in the integral parts that belief systems play for people in orienting and self-regulating the human organism to their physical and psychological environments, and sometimes, when in need of updating, in hindering a vital and fluid participation with the phenomena of life. Originally an intern at Footsteps and serving as senior social worker by the end of his 5-year tenure, Jesse provided direct counseling and a variety of services to the members of this organization that he holds dear to this day. Jesse is currently engaged in full-time psychotherapy practice in Manhattan. Can we welcome Jesse? Okay. And last, and definitely not least, is Leon Setton. Leon is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked in community-based, clinic-based, and private practice settings. He has a Master of Social Work degree from Hunter College School and Social Work, and is in postgraduate psychoanalytic training at the Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy Study Center. Prior to working at Footsteps, Leon's experience has encompassed working with individuals dealing with substance misuse, trauma, issues of sexual and gender identity, depression, anxiety, and HIV/AIDS. He is very passionate and committed to empowering individuals and communities and the mission of Footsteps in his role as Director of Clinical Services. Leon provides group and individual support to members, supervises clinical staff, and grows and develops our clinical care services. Leon, everybody. Okay, I already welcomed everybody. So by the way, this gender setup is basically pretty much how it is everywhere. But I'm really glad to represent the women. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so our first question is around the parable that Michael read. And the question to everyone, and I guess we'll start with Michael, is Eve or Adam, having left paradise, come into your office for an initial meeting because they need support. What is the first thing they say or ask? What are their primary concerns?
We'll see how I do with this mic, but I'm going to ask you. How do I do without the mic? Okay. Curious. I would like you all to think about what your first question would be when you walk into my office, when you've left what you may have thought was a secure environment and then have left because it was not secure. And then you find yourself in a world that is absolutely crazy. Just think about it. At Footsteps, so I'm going to go back some time and then I'm going to come to the present. At Footsteps, the first questions were something like, are you Jewish? I love that laugh, that's great. Somehow that rang true for people. The second question was generally, do you speak Yiddish? That didn't get as much laughter. My response, and I had done some thinking about this pretty quickly because I learned fast and Footsteps people schooled me quickly, was to answer any questions that were professional questions that were equal to the questions that I was going to be asking them. Sort of an equivalence, even though there was an inequality. And so I would say, I am not Jewish, and look to see what the response was, and sometimes hear the response. And then I'd say, and I don't speak Yiddish, and look and wait for the response and see what the response was. And then I would generally say, but what are you asking me? And we'd get around to, you're asking me if I'll understand you. And my answer was, well, I'll give you a moment. Think about what my answer might be. My answer was, no. But I'll understand you enough. And anything I don't, you're going to teach me really fast. Which, by and large, was true. And I get that there is some resentment in having to teach the professional, but there's no way that I can know each and every one of you's life, path, circumstances. I can know it enough. And that's my job, to get into that enough in order to respond. The questions now in private practice are, do you take insurance?
Could you? Yeah.
Eve or Adam come into your office for an initial meeting. What is the first thing they say or ask? What are their primary concerns?
Have you tried the apple? But, so that's what I imagined, Eve and Adam asking. Also something like, what is happening to us? Because there's something about the transformation in this, parable-like dream, or dream-like parable that Michael read, that has kind of equal parts terror and thrill or excitement. And so I was thinking about the terror as kind of more, not common in some sense, but also this potential thrill and joy of the experience of just total change. And one thing that caught my attention about that was that after digesting this figurative fruit, suddenly colors were more vivid, and suddenly time had some sort of definition that it didn't have before, almost like there was less of it. So while I'd be interested in developing support for the terrifying aspects of this change, I'd also be interested in developing support for integrating the real joy and thrill that's available in undergoing a transformative process like this. So.
I don't have a joke to start with, so I'm just going to start. Well, that got laughs anyway, see. I agree with what, the first question always is, are you Jewish? I agree with what Michael said, but the things that I found, I think most surprising when I started working at Footsteps were a couple of things. The first question, and this is true I think in general when people come to therapy or counseling, is like, what do I do now? Like, what do I do? I think what struck me often is sometimes the terror, but then other times like the urgency, which I think is part of the excitement. And I think that how much it took for that person to show up in our office, right, and the amount of energy and thinking and fear and excitement and ability to get outside of their circumstances that they're in, right, even inside their mind, to think there's something else. What do I do now? What do I do now? And they got to go to Footsteps or come into this office, right? And sometimes that's as far as their imagination was able to take them. Often not, but sometimes it feels like, here I am, now what? So I think about that often, and the responsibility of kind of holding that and also not giving the answer because I don't know what you do next. You come here, and this is the first step, right? The other thing that I think about often, and it came up a few weeks ago when I met with someone, is the people are often surprised that there isn't a catch to our support, right? Like, what do you want from me now? And there's a suspicion that there is something that they need to do, something that ideology they need to buy into, something that I or the organization is kind of expecting or demanding of them. And often it takes a little while to kind of really trust that, like, you are here to decide what to do next, and I don't have any preconceived idea of what that should be, and I'm not asking you to do something for me, because I think often in insular communities and families, there's a kind of expectation of getting something back, or something that you have to do in order to get the support, right? The paradise is a paradise if you play the game and do what you have to do correctly, right? There are strings. So I think about that when I think about that question.
Thank you, Leon. I just want to mention something that I forgot to mention in the beginning. Can Molly just raise your hand or stand? So if anybody has any questions or concerns or needs help with anything, Molly is the Footsteps rep for this panel, and you can go up to her. Yeah, give it up for Molly. Why not? Why not? Okay, next question. This is a good one, I think, and I think we'll start with Leon. Okay, how do you think imagination and creativity play a role in people's ability to leave their fundamentalist communities and then build a life outside. And just to give my own answer on this real quick is that when I left, I didn't know about Footsteps. Footsteps wasn't a thing, but my thing was that I was gonna do all the things that I didn't have access to before, like college, like reading, like museums, like every fun thing that I knew I wanted to do, and I'm not even sure how I always knew what I wanted to do, but it was about fulfilling goals that I never could make for myself. But I'll pass it along to Leo.
Thank you, Mindy. I think I'll start in kind of my answer from before, which is, and I'll have Michael could speak more about the idea of the imaginative drive. You're good at that. So I'll leave that to you. But the general idea of it, because I have to kind of preface it, is that before we are able to do anything, we have to imagine it first in our minds, right? I'm going to take the sip of water. I'm imagining myself taking the sip of water, and then I could do it, right? Human beings have all different kinds of drives, and Michael will get into that also. But what I think is the most important thing, often I think when we have conversations about people leaving ultra-Orthodox, the Setton community, and we focus a lot on trauma, we focus a lot on the, restraints of that community and the very black and white way in which people think in those communities, right? But what I always think about is that people that are coming to see us that are doing this are able to imagine something so different from, like Mindi was talking about, so different, even if you don't know what it is that exists outside, there's such a strong drive of imagination in every person that comes in the door, right? To be able to be in, a small little town upstate, only surrounded by other people that look like you, where most things are dictated in very specific ways. You wash your hands in the morning, you say this bracha, you go here, you go there, right? To imagine a different kind of thing is for me really remarkable, and I try to in my work with people to make sure that is always being highlighted, right? If you could imagine that outside of there, then that is a thing that will move you forward to that other question that I said, like, what do I do next? Like, you'll know what to do next, right? You imagine this far, you could imagine further. And I think focusing so much on the negative things could sometimes kind of dim that spark, right? So I try to, as much as possible, kind of like highlight that for people, allow people to like really own that they did that, because it's really significant and is the thing in my mind that brings people, any person that I work with within this community, outside this community, forward and growing.
I think that creativity and imagination, at the risk of being cliche, is something that defines the human being, and it's something that can be serve as a real reservoir of support internally in confronting the unknown. And I think it's also something that can really help to identify the value of an individual, which is something that seems to be really important about people who come to a place like Footsteps or embark on the kind of journey that the sort of people who come to Footsteps embark on. And so I think in learning to, and this is sort of a personal truth too, in learning to value what is uniquely creative in oneself, I think teaches you to have value as an individual, and so that's what I have to say about that.
first, again, I'm going to go to my experience with Footsteps people. And then I'm going to entertain you with some psychobabble. I don't know if any of you were at the panel this morning. It was striking to me, because I know a bit about the history of all of that. And the beginnings of the beginning imaginings of the three organizations and the imaginings of the three individuals. Incredible. Those things were imaginings, and now they're organizations that raise money and do stuff and change people's lives and support people. So it's just that the power of imagination just blows my mind in that respect. And that also was true of pretty much that anyone that, well, not almost everyone that came into the Footsteps offices. That's not a great name for it. I'd like rooms, I don't know. Space, thank you. Thank you. The space. How could I have forgotten? And I think it's crucial to pay attention to that force and to remember that the things that we witnessed downstairs are the things that actually came into being from someone's imagination. The site, and I'm kind of wanting to hear what you all are thinking and how you're responding to all this. We'll get there. But the psychobabble part is, in psychoanalysis, the psyche is an energy force. That's what our psyche, our mind is conceived of. It's energy, it's pure energy. And what optimally we want it to do is to flow fiercely and hopefully unobstructed on a good day. That rarely happens. The world is what it is. There's usually some obstruction, but we want it to optimally flow towards pleasure. Psychoanalytically, pleasure is the release of tension. Think about that. Have a moment of pleasure and think about that. And whatever that tension is, it being released. I'll end my psychobabble in about 1 more minute. Freud, the two main drives or energy forces in our psyche are sex and aggression, and those we are born with. And we have them. And then it's navigating them and using them optimally. Because we all know that all of these energies can be used destructively. So using them creatively rather than destructively. Jung comes along and says that's true for a lot of people, sex and aggression, that makes sense. But the main thing that is really true of everyone is that there's an imaginative drive that we are born with. We are actually born to create. We're born to make things. And that we imagine what we make first. That what the room we're sitting in was imagined. This is what we do as human beings. Again, it's striking to me. So the main thing that I look at when I work with people is how is the imagination being impeded? What's getting in its way? What's repressing the imagination? What's blocking it? A lot of it is oppression. Most people that are coming into the rooms that we are working in have been oppressed. I can't speak for other people, but I'm going to say everyone that is in this room has been oppressed, and that blocks our imagination, and to learn how to get beyond it and work through it to be creative in our lives and live full lives is the goal. And I think that's what comes into our rooms, that expectation. Loosen me up so I have a full life.
Okay, next question, and I think we'll start with Jesse this time. Okay. Often when people leave religion or community, they unknowingly take with them some of their unconscious belief systems, ideas, and behaviors. Like in my own case, I know I took myself with me, so that's what happened. What are some common things you have seen in your work in the community, and how does one move past these dynamics?
Well, I'm defying my notes. I'm just going to say what comes spontaneously, because that's what I do better at. One thing is that I'm going to fail, and is a belief that seems to be carried into this unknown, and that failure is going to look like probably pretty particular scenarios. Or imaginations, maybe, of addiction or homelessness or, any manner of undesirable outcomes. And I think what a space like Footsteps does, or a space like a therapy room does for people, is it gives an opportunity to prove that wrong. And that goes down, like one of the most common things I remember is sort of an expectation of failure in relationships with people, whether they're casual social relationships or friendships or romantic relationships or family relationships, or maybe just their relationship with themselves. And so experimenting with what's possible in a therapeutic relationship becomes a kind of a test tube for breaking down that belief, and also a space where you have people coming together with this shared venture allows for that possibility as well. So it's a little bit like exposure therapy, where you got to kind of gradually and with support engage in greater and greater risks. I have no idea if that answered the question, but yeah, we'll start there. This way?
Do you mind repeating, please? Thank you.
Often when people leave religion or community, they unknowingly take with them some of their unconscious belief systems, ideas, and behaviors. What are some common things you have seen in your work in the community, and how does one move past these dynamics?
Fear. I kind of just want to say that. But I'm long-winded. Fear, I think people bring into the room that they're afraid of themselves. I also think people bring into the room that they're bad. So that they're afraid that they're going to be bad, or they are bad, and that I'm going to see that, and that really they're going to leave my office feeling worse. I think another huge fear is fear of the other, whatever that represents. There's always other. Again, psychobabble, in all of our minds, we have the unconscious, which we don't fully know and we will never fully know. And it's a huge, powerful force, and we're afraid of it, and we also love it. And how do we work through that so that they're leaving the moment that we have together with more access? I'm not going to say happier or like, oh, that was great, but with more access to their own sense of self and power of being who they are. Generally, we make a connection, and that I don't think they're bad. I know that sounds trite, but it really is kind of where it starts. I mean, a lot of what we've talked about and what we've talked about is how do we engage with one another? How do we connect? What makes it work? I generally think it's usually making some contact with a power to change, metamorphosis, like you said, like some sort of, that there is possibility. And I think that's another thing that is in the unconscious, that the unconscious comes to us with possibility that we may not have seen yet, and we may even not want to be ready for. But we're challenged by it, like, see it different. Get your ego out of the way and see it different. And a lot of people, I think, would come with very, very rigid egos. We all do. But some communities support that, even being more rigid. I want to say all communities do. There's a rigidness. There's a rigidness that I think people need to shed in order to open up and be more fluid and connected.
Yeah. Jumping off that, I guess, a little bit, I'm thinking of kind of just generally coming from a space that's very like, that the structure of it is very communal, and leaving as an individual, right? And the tension that kind of emerges, that could play out. I think there is a fear of, you know, everyone's coming, they want to leave a community because it's confining and controlling in some way, or rigid. But then kind of coming in to the rest of the world where there isn't a community that's gonna visit you when you're sick, make sure that you have food on the table, that's gonna visit you when a family member dies. All this stuff could be very frightening. And I think often what I find is, especially in the beginning, a kind of slipping back and forth between wanting to kind of be out in the world as an individual, and then also an expectation of footsteps in some cases, but of being the community that's gonna replace that, right? Let's bring in another group of people that are gonna kind of take care of everything that I need. But along with that then comes the strings, I think, that exists. And I think I find in the work a lot a kind of grappling with that idea, with that belief system, with that kind of psychic structure that's kind of built on like community, and finding kind of the balance of being an individual and sustaining, and also relying on other people in ways that feel safe and that don't feel like controlling and rigid. So I think about that a lot, yeah.
So this is actually more for Michael and Jesse. So I know for myself, I left the community very, very slowly. I went from really, really hot to sort of hot, and then to lukewarm, and then to room temperature, and then I just kind of said, all right, I'm done. But over the process of that, every community that I joined and wanted to find myself in, I made the leader of that community. I put that person on a pedestal that made them superhuman. And I know where that comes from. So I found myself being disappointed again and again and again, and that was sort of also my transition into and out of new communities and new experiences. But what I learned over time is that it's nothing they're doing, it's something I'm doing, and it's an old belief system, an old behavior. And now, being able to say, as a friend of mine used to tell me, feet of clay, like they're just human beings. And now I think I have a much better capacity for relying on myself and asking for advice from people I respect rather than people I enshrine. So I'm just wondering, and I have here a question that relates to it, which says, for many people who leave ultra-Orthodoxy, the act of leaving is incredibly exciting and challenging. What was it like for you to come into this community and then to leave it? Do you see any parallels with the experiences of the people you worked with? And I think Jesse.
That's funny. I feel like there were several questions in there, so I'm going to try. I think it was something like, how did I deal with the expectation of me being seen as a leader? And okay, and then how was it for me to leave? And what are the parallels that I see? Correct? Okay. How are you all doing? Good. All right. Let's see. I just repeated it and lost it. Let's deal with the expectations first. It was daunting. I don't like the idea of leader. I'm much more, I like the idea of cooperation. I know I'm in the center of capitalism, but I appreciate it, but I also find it kind of excludes cooperation a lot of times, and I think that we really need to be working on cooperation as a model across the board. It's getting lost fast. I remember once being in a group, and I don't think that I'm breaking confidentiality with this particular person, but if they're in the room, I don't think they're in the room, but I think that they would be humored rather than, what are you talking about me for? I was in the room that we had the drop-in group, thank you. And we generally ordered pizza, and the delivery guy was late. And the group room had moved from the door that was right to the hallway into another room, so we had to go out. I had to go out because I had to pay him to answer the door. And so I left the group in the middle of a discussion, which we don't do that professionally. Like, we don't leave the room. And we encourage others not to as well. So I said, excuse me, I gotta go get the pizza, and I'll be back in a minute, and keep talking. And I went to the door, and of course I'm signing the thing, and kibitzin, chatting with the guy, kibitzin, thanks, with the guy. And I looked to my Yiddish scholars over here, and I, I'm chatting with the guy because that's what I do, and he's delivering our food. And so as I'm doing that, I hear from the group room, Rabbi Jenkins, we need you in here right away. And I was like, oh. And I walked into the room, and I looked at the person, and I had a smile on my face, but I said, please never call me that again. And I was serious. I was like, I'm not. That's not what you're here for. And stop it. We laughed about it, and of course he still called me that. But I think it's an important moment. It's not what anyone was there for. It's certainly not what I wanted. And I think that there is a strong, there's a strong, in psychobabble, it's called transference. From the people that work with you, we have a strong feeling about this work. I mean, I'm sitting here this morning like, I'm going back to do a conference for Footsteps. It's like, didn't I leave? And why would I want to do that? And it is a very, very, very strong, deep connection about this particular group and about the theme. So, trying not to be a leader in that dynamic is work. The other part, which was, help me out here. Oh, how was it for me to leave? And do I see a parallel process? Absolutely. A lot of the process that I actually, found myself doing as I left or after I left and reflecting on it after, the complaints, suggestions, concerns of people that had left 5-10 years ago, had kind of done some of the initial leaving processes and were more on their feet and more independent and out having a fuller life in the secular world, would often say, like, Footsteps isn't doing anything for us. And of course, my response was, we got a load of stuff to do for the people just leading, and you're independent and you're good. You come back and do stuff. And I think the process was similar in the sense of letting go and stepping into what I was doing next, which was difficult. It was not being available when people contacted me, saying I'm not available, saying if you want to see me for a private appointment and pay some cash, I'm here. Usually I'll exchange some emails with you. I'll point you in the right direction. I'll occasionally come to an event, but really setting that framework, which was a very different framework and very difficult to leave. Thrilling, terrorizing, sad, and lovely.
Maybe for different, well, for my own reasons, I didn't find the position of authority that I maybe could have been perceived to be in as particularly seductive, at least in the context of like a group, like me as sort of some sort of group leader. Yeah, right. But there was something I think that happened over the course of, from the beginning, which was like, you know, as an intern, going to a food and schmooze as my kind of initial interview in 2011, I think it was, with Michael, who is my soon-to-be supervisor. Yeah. Apparently I did good. There are also two footsteppers who decided I did good. Good enough to be the intern anyway. And I mention that because it was a real moment of validation of my value or potential value, I guess, which honestly is something I needed at that point in my life. And something that I need kind of throughout the course of my life. And probably that's pretty universal. Yeah. So while I wasn't sort of seduced by the, you know, by the figure I might be able to kind of be or the position I might be able to assume, there was something about the granting of a certain value or authority or whatever that substance was that maybe was involved that made its way into me and made its way into my decision ultimately to leave, because I became more of an authority of my own life as a result. So that's strange, actually, in retrospect, or right now as I think about it, but kind of cool. There was another part to the question. What was the first one? Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. I mean, the biggest parallel, especially in leaving, is I definitely was not sure it was the right decision. Like, I knew about as much as, I got to a point where I knew as much as I could know, I think, about the rightness or wrongness of that decision for me at that point in my life. But it was a lot of uncertainty. And that felt like a huge parallel. And it felt like an honoring of the time I've spent with people who've made all, you know, there's a lot of them in this room, making those kinds of decisions constantly. You know, it was maybe a practice what you preach moment, yeah, in some sense. Like, it was time for me to kind of enact that for myself. Yeah, maybe this is good enough? Okay, great. Yeah.
I'm gonna just label it for myself, and I think that it's mutual. I think it's not. I think that everyone. I'm gonna put the label. There's a Messiah complex, and it's both ways. There's an expectation that people be saved. There's an expectation from the community that leaves that we save. There's an expectation from where the money comes that we save. There's an expectation from each one of us. So again, can I? Yeah. that we are seduced. That was a great word. We get seduced, and we have to be very wary. Like, we have to be on our toes about this, because that would be colluding with the very thing that everyone's working to leave. So that's part of the intensity of the work, is that kind of like, whoa, no. And how do we move through that to get to something new?
I want to add a quick thing. Is there time to add a quick thing? Yeah, I mean.
Before you add.
Oh, yeah.
Julia's gonna just grab the questions while Jesse adds. Raise them and then, oh, okay, yeah, we should do, yeah.
Yeah, go to questions? Okay.
No, do it.
Well, that might come
We need
later.
time to
Oh, you do?
gather
Okay.
the questions.
What was I going to? Right. Well, I probably had the added benefit of being Michael's, or a portion of Michael's replacement. Is that okay to say?
That's your complex.
So, the Messiah had. That's true. I'm gonna leave the Messiah thing for a second. Yeah. I forgot what the other one was. That the Messiah had left. Yeah. Okay. I want to get to the questions.
Okay, we're gonna get to audience questions in a minute or two, but in the interest of giving Julia a chance to go through them, I'm just gonna ask the last question to Leon, okay? So the question is, a major part of current discourse, and this may actually come up in the audience questions as well, a major part of the current discourse centers around trauma and ways that it impacts individuals and communities. How do you, Leon, see the lens of trauma being useful in working with ex-Orthodox folks, and what are the limitations of it?
Big question. Thank you, Mindi. I hear a lot in Footsteps and outside in my training and just pop kind of psychology right now, trauma all the time. And in my mind, I think it's like a kind of a, there needs to be that kind of overcorrection of focusing on it because we weren't talking about it or thinking about the way people showed up in terms of trauma, right? Like this person is crazy or mentally ill and not really thinking about what was that person's life experience and how does this contribute to the way that they're showing up, right? I think part of, in our discussions, we met before this. We prepared somewhat. There was a desire to kind of think about imagination and creativity as a way to kind of move beyond like a trauma framework, right? Not to diminish or minimize everyone's experience and individual experiences that people had, and also communal trauma that exists, right, within ultra-Orthodox communities. In my mind, much of the rigidity that we see in ultra-Orthodox communities, but also in more progressive, quote-unquote, Jewish communities, focuses on Jewish, like, continuity and survivalism and the reactions that were kind of spoken about in the last panel, including, like, the reaction to Yefed as the cause of anti-Semitism and violence against Jews, is a communal trauma response, right? Keep everyone out. Everyone outside is a danger. We need to stay inside. If you try to disrupt the ways in which we have decided that we stay alive, like you are a threat, right? And I often think that people coming to Footsteps, right, are in a way, within the ultra-Orthodox communities, right, anything like that's a threat is goyish, right, or outs, right, and people that are coming to Footsteps are goys, right, like they are the bad parts, right, and anything that somebody does, you wear a pair of jeans, you're being goyish, right, is the threat, right? In some ways, each individual that's leaving is embodying or feels an embodiment of this dark, bad shadow, if we're gonna get Jungian about it, like part, right? And holding up a mirror, right, to the community in a certain kind of way. And where was I going? So I think that trauma, I guess, is like kind of pervasive within this space, right? But I also think it's it becomes then a way to not like look and develop a sense of identity, right? And how do we do that? And in my mind, the Jewish communities, both secular, both ultra-Orthodox, are operating in kind of modes that are protective and not using imagination, creativity, self-reflection, right? And it's important, I think, for the individuals that are coming here that we give them the opportunity to do that and facilitate that and promote that in whatever ways that we can. And I think if we sit in the trauma for too long and don't let in, like poke some holes and let in a little bit of light and sparks of imagination, then it could get, we could recreate the same kind of patterns that we're trying to emerge from. So I'll say that. I hope that answers.
I think it did. Okay, we're going to get the questions from Julia. Thank you, Julia. Okay. All right, and thank you to everybody that filled out a question. Okay, here's the first one. Did you put them in any order, or? Yeah, okay. Okay, whoever wants to answer this, just, hit the buzzer first. How do you reconcile the opposition between the need to leave the oppression of the community and the desire to remain tied to the religion and still be Jewish? i.e., what can you keep versus what do you need to let go of to heal? Who's up?
I'll start. Something I think about this a lot, actually, with people that I work with, and something that I like to think about is kind of untangling what are the things that we left behind the thing about some of these super religious communities is that it seems like there's a monopoly on everything, right? So like, prayer exists only in the way that we say that prayer exists, for example. Like, this is the way to do it. Like, chesed, or kindness, it's a religious value. You could it kind of is embedded within the community, and in a way, that's how we think about it, right? What I try to do with folks and for myself in a lot of ways is to untie that knot, right? To say that, like, doing charity or community service or the idea of prayer, of like kind of self-reflection, like, does not need to be married to religious or religion, period, right? That it could be a part of your identity, a part of my identity that exists, like divorced from the strings that are attached to it. And I find that to be, it takes, I think, a while because the association is so strong. To be a way of kind of living with those values and not necessarily like throwing everything out the window. Yeah.
I really like that answer. I mean, it's probably obvious, but I think that's such an individual calculus, ultimately, that's done in terms of what can be kind of kept, what needs to be left behind, and maybe what can change in some way, form or shape or whatever, and be part of kind of the doer life. It also seems like that's kind of there's something really meaningful about doing that to me, because it's a little bit of straddling kind of a world that was so kind of defined and known, and introducing yourself to a whole host of new possibilities. And there's something about kind of the process of that decision making, or the calculus, as I said for some reason, that seems to kind of hold that meaningful stance of really honoring your past and being open to your unfolding future. I'm aware I'm sort of answering this abstractly, but that's part of who I am. So I'll pass it to Mike, who will. Did I just? That's the first time I've ever. I'll pass the mic to Michael.
I will take it. This question seems so layered to me. I mean, like really reverberating on a couple of different levels. I think in some ways that someone asks me if I'm Jewish and I say no from the get-go, I've just opened this, for me, opened the space up. And I think for them, I mean, there is something that then opened the space in terms of how you experience yourself, because I have no expectation. So kind of being Goyish came with the perks. And I think that I, hopefully would be able to hold that in the room if I were also Jewish, which I think is our work. Like, for me, it's leading with my psychoanalytic self. And for that psychoanalytic self to be human and friendly, not distant and pejorative. And I'm going to use an example again. Someone was in my office, and it was probably in the. I think like everyone, the leaving happened way before she came into my office, but it was probably within the first 6 months of actually coming into Footsteps and hanging out with people and finding other people that were similar and leaving. And she said that she wasn't Jewish, and I said, okay. And I said, how is that for you? And she said, it's great, and I just don't get the labeling, and and she was kind of just going out and beginning to experience the secular world. And we kind of had a good rapport, and at some point, I was laughing with her, and I said, get back to me in 6 months. I said, because when you start hitting up against the Goyish world, you'll understand just how Jewish you are. Like, your identity will actually, you'll learn more of your identity by being with the other. As I was learning more about myself. Like, it was a mutual process a lot of times. I don't know if it was 6 months later or a year later, but we were having a conversation, and I looked down and she was wearing a Star of David.
So just real quick for me, I reconciled it again and again and again and again and again, like going back to the buffet and trying different things and going to the things that I thought I liked, and it was, and I think it's still evolving for me. So I think that it's giving yourself permission, and for me it was giving myself permission to be in not knowing what it was going to look like. That was the most important thing for me. Okay, next question here says, what advice or initial thoughts do you have for individuals whose imagination has been stifled due to individual suppression that goes on in the Orthodox community? And whoever wants to go.
First of all, all of the programs that were developed at Footsteps, I think before, during, and after my being in the seat of program director of programs, were developed out of an imaginative capacity of the participants, and also out of some dialogue of hearing something being stuck. So the art shows are good, sort of like kind of an of course, but all of the dialogues, I remember someone coming up to me and they were saying that they were, I can't remember, I think they were just starting or in the middle of going for their GED and working on it, and said, I turned and I said, and they were thinking about applying for college, that was it. And I said, have you thought of, sorry, I laugh at my own ignorance sometimes. I said, have you thought about what you might want to be? They looked at me like, I almost swore, like, what? And I kind of looked back and they laughed and they said, no one has ever asked me that question. And, you know, it was like one of those learning moments, like, and then for me, it's how do you break down that question? Like, how do you get to that question, and like, what's before that question? If the answer is, I don't know, I want to be a psychoanalyst. So, you know, how do you break that down so that you actually have learning moments that increase your capacity to do all of this on your own and with others in a way that feels more free? One of the most simple things, and it's funny because we kind of do it everywhere, brainstorming. Because especially in black and white thinking, generally someone will have, let's say white thinking, let's say black thinking, and they'll say an extreme, and I'll say, tell me the opposite. Tell me the opposite. And then I'll say, list 10 things in the middle. Let's go to 20. And don't edit yourself. We're just throwing them out. Because that's choice. Black and white is a reaction. Extremes are a reaction. If you fill in the middle, you have choice. So that's trying to somehow build in imagination learning, I guess.
Yeah, I think I would also be interested in counteracting, in order to counteract some of the messages around, or it said, the suppression of individual imagination. Yeah, or sort of the latent or maybe more explicit messages that's something that isn't valuable. I would want to really kind of find out how important this facet of this person is to them, because if it's something that's really important to them, then maybe a relationship between them, you know, the part of them that finds it important and the part of them that feels like it's not important or has been told that it's not important could be struck and developed over time. And sometimes I serve as that other who finds that piece important to begin with, in a non-imposing way, or a non-assuming that that's important to them way. There was something else, but that's what came.
Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to get to as many of the questions as possible. So I know normally you guys are doing the listening, and now you're doing the talking, but maybe you could keep it to like 2 minutes an answer, max, okay? You love that. All right, all right. Okay, so just to give a quick, on my own way of just bursting through my fear of the unknown, is my first class that I ever registered for in college, and this was a community college. The title of it scared me so much that I knew I needed to go to it. And it was Women, Men, Sex, and Power. Think about that for a second. And I never looked back. It was amazing. Okay. Next question. Okay, how has your work with Footsteps affected, if it has, your career as a therapist? Or I guess your career as a therapist.
It taught me to understand my value as a fellow other.
That's a tough question. I think similarly, I think it was the first space where, for me, like I felt the closest to the people I was working with, right? And so my transference was stronger than it's ever been, and I think it allowed me to more fully integrate myself as an individual, and then also more fully integrate as a therapist in that role, if that makes sense. As I got more integrated, I was able to kind of show up in a different way, I think, in a better way, yeah.
It's a lot of things, but I think that the main thing for me is to trust in my own honesty, and to trust that that facilitates honesty, and to also to be really okay with being friendly and human, and there's not a need to be reserved and kind of like this professional veneer.
Not a psychotherapist, but for me, it really meant that I'm really not that special. Like I'm not unique. My experiences are unique, but I have many people around me who've also experienced stuff, and there's a support there, just knowing that. Okay. Next question is, do you see a lot of abuse in the childhoods of footsteppers? And do you think that that's a major push for them to leave Orthodoxy? Saving the easy ones for last.
Well, many, certainly some, and plenty, more than anyone would probably like to see. But yeah, for some, I would say that is the sort of the major. Well, that was a sort of trauma or a kind of betrayal or a crux upon which a distrust was built, and eventually came to fruition enough to do something about, or maybe. You know, at a point in life when you're able to do something about it, it is done.
I guess I'm struggling with the question and the link between one and the other. Yeah, I think that, yes, I agree. I think within any insular community, there's, when we're closed off from, and it's kind of dark, there's gonna be things that happen at maybe a higher rate than it does in other communities. I'm not sure. I don't know statistics. I don't want to speak to it. I do know anecdotally, people come in and we ask questions around that when in our initial meetings with folks, and there is a high rate of yes answers to that question. I think that I kind of place it within the context of, there are also a lot of people that experience abuse that don't leave, right? So I don't know about like that direct correlation. I do think that that it exists for a lot of people, and that is that thing that kind of broke. But I wonder about the linking of those two things and that question. I don't know. For some reason, it's reminding me of like people who became gay because they were abused by an older male. I don't know. It has that like vibe, and I don't know that they're directly related. They might be in many people's cases, but I have a question about it, I guess.
I thank you for saying too many. I just think that is really kind of, yes. I think, and also betrayal, and I think that most people that come into Footsteps have a sense of betrayal, and that also might go back to the question about what unconscious things kind of come to the surface. So with a betrayal as a suspicion that I'm going to be hurt again, or betrayed. In terms of the direct question of child abuse, I think that there are people that come to Footsteps that have been abused as children. And I don't see the correlation between that and leaving. People that abuse could stay and could actually have a stronger belief in God. So I don't see the correlation there, and I also kind of get angry that it's used as an excuse or a sort of an attack. It's like, how, that's mean. That's just mean. And I think that unfortunately children are abused in many places in the world, and I don't see it being more. Although I do agree with Leon that in insular places, and also repression, the idea of repression is that that stuff is going to creep out. And I use the word creep distinctly.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, so I hope that nobody minds, but I picked the question that I think will be a good sort of closer for each person to answer, for each of our panelists to talk about. And the question is, what is one piece of advice you'd give to therapists serving the OTD population, and what do you do for self-care? And we have like 4 minutes total. Total.
I'm going to do self-care first. I come to these conferences. Let's do it together. Everyone, take a deep breath. Let's do 2, and on this one, let's just take in everything that we've experienced and think of something nice we're going to do later. I don't know what the other question is, but I'm fine with that right now.
I want to say to other therapists, I was like, enjoy the work, because it's special enough, and often enough I've found that working with people who go through something like this is like there's a richness and a depth and a liveliness that is available, and that to enjoy it. Don't be shy. Yeah, that too. Oh, self-care. Yeah. Yeah, I like Hani mentioned this, but I love being in the woods, and I do it a lot more now. And I do it as a priority, actually, like a first thing now in the day, which is important, actually. It turns out, I'm discovering. So, yeah, that and sleep, like basic functions, like sleep and eat right, good, or whatever that is for you. Don't forget it. Yeah.
I agree with your piece of advice. I think as I'm the one that's in it, the thing that I hear the most from members when we send them to therapists is that they're treated like animals in a zoo. To go back to the Adam and Eve kind of parable, it's like, this is so interesting, this feels so exotic or fascinating in a certain kind of way. And yes, but everyone's life experience, hopefully as a therapist, or what I try to bring is that everyone's life experience is fascinating. Not to end on kind of, so that's my biggest piece of advice that I give to people when they call us and want to volunteer as therapists, which is lovely. That it's not just a kind of, I don't know, voyeuristic undertaking. Self-care, I don't, yes, vacation, yes. Everyone knows I go away, which is great. And I think is appropriate given the work, right? It's like go and see different new things. Like that's why everyone comes to Footsteps. So I try to do the same thing, and I go and I see new and different things as much as I can given my salary and my ability to do so. But yes, that's my thing.
And we're out of time. Thank you so much. Let's give a hand. Thank you all for coming.